Support for this podcast comes from the Central Valley Journalism Collaborative, connecting communities with the resources, infrastructure, and networks to ensure a vibrant local free press.
From KVPR in Fresno, this is Central Valley Daily. It's Wednesday, February 19th. I'm Elizabeth Arkalian. How do you properly honor a civil rights leader like Cesar Chavez?
He understood the problems that we, as a Mexican-American community, were going through.
Coming up, we hear about the efforts to rename a large stretch of South Fresno streets after him. But first, these headlines. A Valley native could be the newest member of the new Trump administration. Lori Chavez DeRemer is from Hanford and got her undergraduate degree at Fresno State. She's who Trump has picked to lead the Department of Labor. Chavez DeRemer will appear for a confirmation hearing today, where she'll face questions about her nomination. Chavez DeRemer, who previously represented an Oregon House district, lost re-election in November. A Kern County judge has thrown out a call for a special election at the Greenfield Union School District. According to TV station KERO, the judge in the case says there's not enough evidence to order a new election. The calls for a new election came after more than 100 ballots were sent to the wrong voters in November. Mercy Pena beat incumbent Ricardo Herrera by only 8 votes. But after the judge's ruling, those results will stand. The school district says it respects the judge's ruling. For decades, scientists have used climate patterns known as El Niño and La Niña to predict annual rainfall. But as KVPR's Rachel Livenall reports, a new study is showing these models may no longer be as accurate as they used to be.
The study was conducted by the Center for Western Weather and Water Extremes at UC San Diego. It looked at 70 years of climate patterns in California and the southwestern U.S. Typically, an El Niño climate year will bring a wet winter, while La Niña often means it will be a drier one. But researchers say the phases may not be correct anymore. The research has found that one weather event in particular is to blame. Atmospheric rivers are climate events that bring large amounts of rainfall in a short amount of time. The study found that in almost all winters that weren't predicted correctly as either El Niño or La Niña, there was also more or less atmospheric rivers than expected. Researchers say these patterns will continue with climate change. For KVPR News, I'm Rachel Livenall.
A former leader in the Central Valley radio business has died. Radio station KMJ says its former general manager, Al Smith, died on Saturday. Smith led KMJ for 15 years before leaving in 2006. Smith later served as the president of the Fresno Chamber of Commerce for a decade. KMJ radio host Ray Appleton says that Smith was, quote, a born leader. Smith is credited with leading the station to high ratings. He was 86 years old.
Join KVPR for an event with NPR senior White House correspondent Tamara Keith, Wednesday, February 26th at Fresno City College. Get an inside perspective on covering the White House for NPR at this in-person event. Tamara Keith grew up in Hanford before going on to cover world events and presidents for audiences nationwide. Seating is limited. RSVP for this free event online at kvpr.org/events.
And now to our main story. The late farm labor leader Cesar Chavez will be remembered next month on Cesar Chavez Day. It's a federal holiday proclaimed by President Barack Obama in 2014. Cesar Chavez Day is also a state holiday, and there are other ways he's remembered, through murals across California, statues in places like the Fresno State campus, and the National Chavez Center in Kern County. But now, if you pull out your phone and open your map and zoom into South Fresno, you'll find a long stretch of road named Cesar Chavez Boulevard. Before, the streets were named California, Ventura, and Kings Canyon Road. Local advocates have fought for 30 years to rename the corridor in honor of Chavez, but the fight wasn't easy. The renaming effort split city and county leaders. Lawsuits were even filed to stop the name change. In recent weeks, a Fresno County Superior Court judge dismissed a legal challenge, saying the city of Fresno was within its rights to rename the roadways in this jurisdiction. One of those helping keep Chavez's legacy alive is Venancio Gaona. Gaona is now 86 years old and was part of the original community group who conceived of renaming the street back in the 1990s. And Venancio says there is still work to do. He recently joined me for a conversation and starts out by describing how the idea to name the street came about.
Cesar died April 23, 1993. Within 1 week, I called the community for various people, anywhere from 20 to 30 people. They all responded. We started to meet, and we discussed what we would do, how we would honor his legacy. We talked about naming a monument, a school, streets. But eventually what won out was the feeling that where had Cesar Chavez worked, where had he marched, where had we marched with him, where had he led boycotts? Before the United Farm Workers were formed, they held a convention in Fresno, September 30th, 1962. And at that convention, there were something close to 200 delegates that formed the National Farm Workers Association. So before there was a UFW, there was a National Association of Farm Workers. And that was held at an address on California Avenue that's now no longer exists. And that building was the Edison Hall. That's where Cesar Chavez, Dolores Huerta, and all the delegates from the various agricultural committees had their convention. They gave themselves a name. They formed a constitution. They decided what they were going to do in terms of their goals. So
that was here in Fresno.
That was here in Fresno.
Road. So there was significance. Now, at that time, Venancio, what was your involvement in the community? What were you working?
At that time, in 1962, I was teaching at Fresno High, as I recall. But I was originally from Bakersfield. By the way, my father was one of the delegates to that convention. He played I don't want to say a big role, but he helped organize other delegates from farm workers in the Kern County area.
And you mentioned that you yourself had an experience working in agriculture as well.
Oh, yes. Before I started college, my early days as a youngster, I worked in the fields.
I'd love if you'd elaborate a little bit more on what Cesar Chavez meant to you and why you think he's so significant here in our region.
Well, to me, he is a man that felt the pains of the farm workers, of the people. And when I say the people, I'm talking about ordinary Mexican Americans that not only worked in the farms, in agriculture, but that could not elevate themselves, could not, I'm going to use a word, that were disenfranchised in school and in jobs. I knew that he understood the problems that we, as a Mexican-American community, were going through. This is difficult to demonstrate, but people needed someone to lead them in a movement, it did become a movement, and people said, we don't want to take this anymore.
And it's worth noting many Filipinos joined in on that farm worker fight
Yes.
as well. And
Yes.
Fresno is a place with a lot of history, a lot of big community groups. We've got a big Punjabi community, Hmong community. There's no denying the presence of the Mexican and Mexican-American community as well. So in your view, having this sort of legacy of Cesar Chavez in place, does it feel at this point that the fight has come full circle? Are you happy at this point that After 30 years?
No, I am not. And the fight continues because the Fresno County Board of Supervisors used they were influenced by the opposition, by the group that opposed this recently. The African Americans, under the leadership of B.T. Lewis, who as a minister also works for the mayor of Fresno, and also members of the Armenian community, shall we say, led that organization of Concept Number One, their group. So we want to extend what was the original Cesar Chavez Boulevard to Temperance, and we will work on that.
And let me clarify real quick. So the opposition had sued against the renaming of the streets, and a judge ruled that they did not succeed and that the renaming was legally allowed. So you're saying at this point, while that's great, there's still that original extension of the street to Temperance that you're still going to be focused on.
Yes. And if it takes another 30 years, it'll take us 30 years.
Lastly, Venancio, you were quoted in the Fresno Bee saying that, quote, persistence is important. You've been very persistent in this fight, and in a very controversial political time that we're in now, how important would you say persistence is, especially as you yourself still have a fight ahead of you?
I think that one has to, being a farm worker, you have to hold your head up and look ahead and be persistent, and you have to demonstrate, and that's what Cesar Chavez did. You have to demonstrate leadership to other people who do not understand, who do not see things as you do. You have to be a teacher. You have to lead by example, and that's what I meant by persistence.
That was Venancio Gaona. Gaona is a retired teacher and professor in Fresno who was instrumental in pursuing the renaming of Cesar Chavez Boulevard in the 1990s. And that does it for today. Thank you so much for listening. If you ever have a story idea or feedback for Central Valley Daily, we would love to hear from you. Just send us an email at podcast@kvpr.org. Today's episode was produced by Jonathan Linden and KVPR with support from the Central Valley Journalism Collaborative. I'm Elizabeth Arkalian. Find the latest local news anytime at kvpr.org.
Each morning, it's a new opportunity, a chance to start fresh. Up First from NPR makes each morning an opportunity to learn and to understand. Choose to join the world every morning with Up First, a podcast that hands you everything going on across the globe and down the street, all in 15 minutes or less. Start your day informed and anew with Up First by subscribing wherever you get your podcasts.